June 4, 1943. Railroad Street, Maquia, Texas. Unteroffizier Veer Burkhart's hand shook slightly as he wrote in his hidden diary, knowing discovery would earn him solitary confinement. The Americans cannot be telling the truth, he thought. No nation fighting a war on two fronts could maintain such abundance. Through the train window, he saw evidence that contradicted 3 years of Nazi propaganda. Every farmhouse, street corner, and shop window glowed with electric light. The Texas plains stretched in an endless network of illumination at 10 o'clock at night. In Germany, blackout rules had kept cities and farms dark since 1940. Rural electrification had barely reached 20% even before the war. Yet here, in what Nazi propaganda described as decadent, collapsing America, electricity flowed freely. 1,850 veterans of Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps stepped down from the passenger train, not in cattle cars or freight wagons, but in cushioned Pullman coaches with dining service and sleeping compartments. The townspeople of Maquia had gathered to witness their arrival. What none realized was that this moment would begin a profound psychological shift, systematically dismantling Nazi ideology. Allied victory was being measured not just on battlefields, but in the capacity of American industry. Production statistics and organization were rewriting assumptions these soldiers held about their enemies, their homeland, and their cause. The collapse had begun on May 13, 1943, in Tunisia. General Jürgen von Arnim, Rommel's replacement, surrendered with roughly 250,000 to 275,000 German and Italian troops. Numbers varied slightly as scattered units continued to surrender over the following days. The Wehrmacht's most experienced desert fighters, men who had pushed the British back to Egypt and earned Montgomery's respect, were suddenly prisoners. Among them was Hethschaman Friedrich Rodka, Iron Cross First Class, veteran of the France campaign, wounded twice in North Africa. Rodka's diary, later found in the National Archives, offered historians detailed insight into the psychological impact of American captivity. From the port of Oran, Algeria, Rodka and about 30,000 other prisoners waited in makeshift camps. American efficiency began to challenge their preconceptions immediately. Thousands were processed daily with precision. Identity cards were photographed and filed, medical checks completed, inoculations given, and Geneva Convention rights explained in fluent German by officers trained for this purpose. The first real shock came with the food. Oberreiter Hans Muir, captured with the 21st Panzer Division, wrote to his mother 8 months later. The Americans' care and consistency in provisions were far beyond anything the soldiers had imagined. While confined in the cages at Oran, awaiting ships, the Americans provided food better than anything we had eaten during 6 months of desert warfare. White bread, genuine coffee, and meat are served twice daily. At first, we assumed it was propaganda, a deliberate attempt to impress us. We did not realize this was the standard ratio of the U.S. military. The Liberty ships transporting us across the Atlantic were themselves a testament to American industrial capacity. The SS Robert E. Peary had been constructed in just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes at Kaiser Shipyards in Richmond, California, a fact that, had the Germans known, would have seemed impossible. At peak production, 3 such vessels were completed daily, returning from supply runs to Europe not empty, but carrying as many as 30,000 prisoners per month by the summer of 1943. The 2-week journey across the Atlantic in July 1943 became the second stage of psychological upheaval. Feldbetärd Kurt Zimmermann of the 90th Light Division meticulously recorded his impressions in letters home after repatriation. The crew discarded more food daily than his entire company had received in weeks of rations in Africa. Half-eaten steaks, whole loaves of bread, gallons of spoiled milk were thrown away openly, not to ridicule, but because such waste was meaningless to the Americans. Their supply was effectively limitless. The ships themselves were floating lessons in American power. Prisoners discovered their vessel was one of 2,710 Liberty ships built during the war, each requiring 250,000 parts from 32 states. Engines came from 3 separate factories, each producing 900 horsepower cylinders, later assembled in ports that barely existed 2 years prior. Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm von Steichenborn, scion of a Prussian family that had served in every German war since Frederick the Great, would later write, "As our ship neared the American coast, I watched the radar antenna rotate above the bridge. This technology, which we assumed only we or perhaps the British had, was standard on a cargo ship. It was then that he first suspected Germany had already lost the war." August 2, 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. The first sight of America obliterated the final illusions of industrial weakness. The base spanned 4,300 acres, its docks stretching for miles, cranes loading and unloading dozens of ships simultaneously. In a single day, this port handled more tonnage than Hamburg managed in a week. Gerrit Johan Verber, a factory worker before conscription, counted 47 cargo ships in various stages of handling. Each crane lifted weights requiring a dozen men and horses in Germany, operating smoothly on electric power without the coal smoke that choked German cities. Prisoners marched in columns toward waiting trains, passing parking lots full of civilian cars, hundreds belonging to dock workers. In Germany, private cars were limited to the wealthy or party elite. The Volkswagen remained mostly a propaganda promise. Here, ordinary laborers drove freely. The trains awaiting them were no boxcars or 48 wagons, but full Pullman passenger coaches with padded seats, sleeping berths, dining cars, and observation cars. Head shaman Rodka wrote, "We boarded like tourists, not prisoners." Even air conditioning, non-functional in one car, astonished the Germans. The 3-day journey from Norfolk to Texas and Oklahoma camps further dismantled Nazi ideology. As the trains passed through Virginia towns, prisoners pressed faces to windows, witnessing electric-lit communities, Martinsville, Danville, Greensboro, that Germany would have envied. Factories ran night shifts, parking lots were full, and every detail displayed American technological superiority. At Roanoke, Virginia, mechanized railway operations finished in 30 minutes what would have taken 2 hours in Germany, with coal loaders, water pumps, and lubrication systems automated. Workers displayed casual wealth, leather boots, Coca-Cola in glass bottles, cigarettes stubbed mid-smoke. Electrical engineer Heinrich Miller calculated that the yard used more power in an hour than his Berlin district did in a day. Lights burned in empty buildings, fans ran in unoccupied rooms. Carelessness born of limitless resources. Crossing into Tennessee and Kentucky, prisoners saw industrial power in full. Endless factories stretched as far as the eye could see. The Alcoa aluminum plant in Tennessee ran 3 miles along the river, its electric furnaces consuming 175,000 kilowatts, more than Munich used entirely. Near Louisville, the trains slowed as they passed the Rubbertown Industrial Complex, where synthetic rubber plants had been erected on formerly empty fields in just 18 months. 4 enormous facilities, each employing thousands, were producing 800,000 tons of synthetic rubber per year. Germany, despite pioneering the technology, had never exceeded 120,000 tons in its most productive year. Oberleutnant Erich Hoffmann, a chemist from IG Farben, immediately grasped the significance. In a post-war interview, he recalled, "I recognized the plants. The distillation columns, the catalytic crackers, each one surpassed anything we had built, and there were 4 here alone. We were told dozens more existed nationwide." The trains passed Ford's Willow Run factory near Detroit, visible from miles away. Constructed in only 9 months, this single plant produced 1 B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. At peak output, 42,000 workers assembled bombers from 1,550,000 parts supplied by 1,500 subcontractors. The facility spanned 2.5 million square feet and consumed more electricity than the entire German city of Cologne. Luftwaffe pilot Hauptmann Verli shot down over Tunisia, pressed his face to the window, and counted 17 B-24s in various stages of assembly. Americans had claimed their planes were inferior and hastily built, but the precision and quality on display contradicted that notion. These aircraft were not substandard. They were simply constructed faster than we could comprehend. Deeper into the country, the destruction of Nazi myths intensified. In St. Louis, the trains crossed the Mississippi on the Eads Bridge, below which barges carried more grain than Germany had harvested in 1942. Grain elevators lined both banks, each capable of feeding a German city for months. Unteroffizier Karl Schmidt, a Bavarian farmer's son, wrote in his diary, "The Americans move food as we transport ammunition, in vast quantities, without concern for waste. I watched one barge loaded with enough wheat for my village for 5 years. The crane operator ate a sandwich with meat thicker than our weekly ration." In Kansas City, the train stopped at a massive stockyard where tens of thousands of cattle waited. The smell of slaughterhouses carried for miles. German prisoners who had survived on 200 grams of meat weekly in Africa watched American workers casually eat beef sandwiches. Graffiter Paul Fisher wrote, "They ate meat as if it were bread, something we only wished we could do." Guards even purchased hamburgers for prisoners without concern, paying with a single dollar, a normal transaction in this land. Arrival at Camp Hearn, Texas, built in 4 months, offered the next level of cognitive shock. Housing 3,000 to 4,800 prisoners, the camp exceeded civilian standards. Wooden barracks had electric lighting, flush toilets, hot showers, and steam heating, built for more lumber than some German villages. Camp hospitals amazed medical personnel. Oberst Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Friedrich Bauer, chief surgeon of the 164th Light Division, found equipment superior to most German civilian hospitals. X-ray machines, surgical tools, and pharmaceutical supplies unavailable in Germany since 1941. Penicillin was administered freely, even to minor cases, while German soldiers had perished for lack of basic drugs. Camp kitchens became another classroom in American abundance. Walk-in refrigerators, electric mixers, automated dishwashers, and gas ranges served 5,000 men. Daily rations included fresh milk, eggs, meat, vegetables, and white bread, unseen by German civilians since 1939. Feldwebel Otto Krebs, a former Munich hotel chef, wrote, "We discarded more food than my family saw in 3 years. Not spoiled, just excess. Americans prepared 10% more than needed, throwing the surplus away. I wept, discarding perfect bread." By September 1943, labor shortages led to POWs working on farms and factories nationwide, exposing them to the heartland unblinded. They saw endless fields, factories running 3 shifts, stocked shops, full parking lots, and houses with modern appliances. At a cotton gin near Houston, Unteroffizier Herbert Lang observed a single machine processing more cotton in an hour than his village could in a month manually. Powered by the Colorado River Authority, the gin demonstrated rural electrification at 90% of Texas farms. Farmers were ordinary, yet had electricity, running water, vehicles, and tractors. Workers, including black laborers, had more food than German workers saw in a week, and this was standard. In Nebraska, prisoners witnessed mechanized sugar beet harvesting. A single combine replaced 100 men. Fields stretched to the horizon, each surpassing entire German counties. Yields reached 60 bushels per acre compared to Germany's best 30. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann, working near Scottsbluff, noted, "The farmer's 16-year-old son drove a tractor worth more than my father earned in a lifetime." The boy laughed, promising a newer John Deere model. Factory work exposed prisoners to industrial might. Geneva Convention rules barred direct war production, but technical loopholes allowed prisoners to observe American efficiency. At a Campbell's soup plant in New Jersey, production exceeded German monthly totals run by women and elderly men. Automation included conveyors, filling machines, and steam cookers. One elderly woman managed the line while drinking coffee and listening to the radio, doing the work of 50 German laborers. Near Detroit, unloading coal at a power plant revealed automotive conversion to war production. River Rouge employed 100,000, producing jeeps, engines, and tanks, consuming 1.5 million kilowatts, more than Hamburg. Oberreiter Franz Kellner wrote, "Thousands of workers drove cars. Even officers rarely had one in Germany. Many owned two, work and family." By winter 1943, prisoners experienced ideological collapse. They requested American newspapers, books, and education. Major Paul Noland reported that even the most fanatical Nazis grew silent, questioning prior teachings. Camp newspapers reflected this shift, with editors steering discussion to democracy, economics, and post-war plans. Lieutenant Herman Goetz wrote, "We were told America was weak, divided, controlled by Jews. Now I see the most organized, powerful nation. We were fed lies." Italian POW treatment added to the shock. Cooperating Italians received better housing, pay, freedom, and social integration. German prisoners observed them eating in restaurants and even dating Americans. Haidman Friedrich Schultz noted, "Italians betrayed us, yet are treated better than allies. Americans show no hatred. Democracy appears more honorable than our system." Christmas 1943 delivered the final psychological blow. Churches and civic groups sent 500,000 packages to German prisoners, containing cigarettes, candy, toiletries, and games. Local communities invited prisoners to dinners, though rules limited attendance. At Camp Hearn, choirs sang German carols, women sent cookies, Boy Scouts delivered cards. Oberlieutenant Walter Mueller wrote, "They know we are enemies, yet show genuine Christian charity. Only those secure and victorious could act this way." The Christmas feast was beyond comprehension. Turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, gravy, vegetables, pies, and ice cream. Quantities of food that Germany had not witnessed since before the First World War. Prisoners ate until they could eat no more, unable to fathom such abundance offered to enemies. "We ate like kings," wrote Feldwebel Hansa. "Better than German generals, better than party leaders, and this was ordinary." Guards explained this was a standard American Christmas dinner replicated in households across the country. If prisoners were fed this way, what might American soldiers receive? By early 1944, over 40,000 German prisoners were enrolled in study programs. They learned English, American history, mathematics, and sciences. The University of Chicago supplied correspondence courses. Stanford University sent professors to lecture on democracy and economics. Hunger for knowledge grew insatiable. Prisoners taught that Americans were uncultured barbarians, discovered libraries with millions of volumes, universities open to all classes, and scientific work that led the world. Newspapers were freely available, offering multiple perspectives, something unimaginable in Nazi Germany. Dr. Wilhelm von Braun, a physicist from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, attended atomic physics lectures at Camp Shelby. He later wrote, "American professors, including Jewish refugees, instructed without hatred. They presented science as universal, belonging to humanity. Their research outpaced Germany's, and they shared it openly with enemies. This generosity defied all understanding under Nazi doctrine." Camp theaters screened American films, not propaganda, but Hollywood productions. Prisoners saw Gone with the Wind, witnessing defeat and renewal that mirrored their own experience. They watched The Grapes of Wrath, amazed by the self-criticism shown to outsiders. Lieutenant Joseph Kramer wrote, "They reveal failures, struggles, conflicts. In Germany, critique meant death. Here, honesty strengthens, not weakens." Spring 1944 expanded prisoner labor programs as American industry peaked.
Germans worked in canneries, mills, and factories, witnessing production on a scale propaganda could never convey. At the Higgins Boat Factory in New Orleans, prisoners handled steel for D-Day landing craft. Workers assembled 700 boats per month, each with 20,000 components. 20,000 employees, including thousands of women, operated cranes, welded hulls, and ran assembly lines. Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Zimmermann wrote, "Women doing men's work, black workers on machinery, teenagers running drills, all deemed impossible in a democracy. Yet the line ran continuously, 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 1 month produced more boats than our Navy could build in a year." At Republic Steel, Ohio, 10,000 tons of steel were produced daily. Blast furnaces ran non-stop, fed by iron ore from Minnesota and coal from Pennsylvania. Scale and output surpassed any German expectation. Oberreiter Paul Hartmann noted, "I thought I knew industrial production. This exceeded imagination. Spillage alone exceeded our entire output. Workers complained of overtime while surpassing what we could achieve with slave labor and double shifts." The summer 1944 harvest demolished any myth of American weakness. Prisoners observed Midwest agriculture capable of feeding the planet. Kansas wheat farms yielded more grain than entire German provinces. Combines swept fields like ships on a golden sea, harvesting 100 acres per day. Grain elevators held more wheat than Germany imported annually. Underoffizier Franz Werber, a Prussian farmer, recorded, "One American machine does what 100 German farmers could not." Aerial photographs show thousands of square miles of wheat. Half the harvest lost and still more than all Europe combined. California's Central Valley orchards stretched to the horizon. Prisoners saw fruit discarded for minor blemishes, fruit prized in Germany. Whole crops plowed to maintain prices caused psychological distress. Curator Otto Schultz wrote, "Mountains of oranges pushed into pits. We begged to send them home. Guards explained it was impossible. The waste proved unlimited resource." June 6, 1944, news of Normandy invasion reached.
Throughout captivity, prisoners witnessed American humanity. Despite propaganda portraying Americans as sentimental, POWs saw mercy. Guide Hans Miller received a Red Cross message from the camp commander after his son died in Hamburg. Leighton Paul Fisher's wife received food packages from American churches in Germany. Americans separated the people from the regime, wrote Hedman Otto. They claimed to fight Hitler, not Germans. This distinction, initially suspect, proved genuine. They prepared prisoners to rebuild Germany, not punish it. Medical treatment astounded prisoners. German doctors collaborated with American staff, learning modern techniques and using advanced equipment. Operations were provided to all, not just elites. Mental health care, absent in the Wehrmacht, was extended to traumatized soldiers. Dr. Friedrich Bauer wrote, "Suicide attempts met counseling, not punishment. Breakdowns met therapy, not beatings. This showed true power, secure enough to show mercy." By March 1945, the secret re-education program yielded remarkable results. Over 25,000 prisoners enrolled in democracy courses. Camp newspapers covered constitutional government, markets, and civil rights. Discussions focused on post-war Germany. Fanatical Nazis wrote essays on democratic reconstruction. Officers who swore oaths to Hitler planned to implement American agriculture. "We became missionaries for democracy," admitted Oberst Hermann Göring in 1975. "Observation, not coercion, had converted us. Ordinary citizens lived better than the German aristocracy. We wanted that for Germany." Transformation was so complete that authorities feared over-enthusiasm. Some requested to remain in America. Others married Americans through correspondence programs. Thousands immigrated in the 1950s. April 1945 revealed the final truth. The American liberation of German concentration camps was initially denied, called propaganda, but evidence, soldier testimony, photos, newsreels, letters, overwhelmed doubt. Prisoners faced total moral collapse. Their nation's cause was evil. Headman Walter Schmidt wrote, "We believed ourselves warriors for a great cause. We discovered we were tools of criminals. We thought we brought civilization. We were the barbarians. Americans, whom we called weak, showed true civilization." By May 1945, German POWs faced repatriation with conflicting feelings. They had witnessed America contradict everything they were taught. They had eaten better as captives than as soldiers, been treated with more dignity than by their government. The final months focused on preparing for a destroyed Germany. Authorities offered vocational training, agricultural education, and political instruction. Prisoners learned of the Marshall Plan pre-announcement, understanding America would rebuild, not punish. "They prepared us to rebuild our country," wrote Oberst Friedrich von Tauben. "Skills, knowledge, hope. They transformed defeated soldiers into future citizens." Between 1945 and 46, 371,638 German POWs returned home to a divided, devastated Germany. They carried priceless knowledge of a democratic industrial society. Former prisoners became agents of transformation. They brought American methods to German industry, efficiency to agriculture, and democratic ideals to politics. Hans Kroll, ex-Camp Shelby prisoner, became West German ambassador to the U.S. Walter Hallstein taught at Camp Co., later president of the European Commission. Rüdiger von Marr, held at Camp Hearn, became German representative to the UN. Edward Ackermann, Fort Robinson prisoner, led agricultural reform. The 1950s economic miracle partly stemmed from lessons learned in American camps. "Prosperity comes from freedom, not conquest," Hans Kroll wrote. "Democracy created wealth. Diversity strengthened society. Fair treatment increased output. These lessons shaped modern Germany." Historians call the German POW experience one of history's most successful re-education programs. No propaganda, no coercion. Industrial power and democracy converted Nazis into citizens. Observation was key. Prisoners saw society functioning, enemies treated with dignity, production beyond imagination, and living standards that exposed Nazi lies. Dr. Arnold Kramer concluded, "America won through reality. Every meal, light, and toilet argued against Nazism. POWs converted through prosperity. Of 371,638, fewer than 1% attempted escape, only 2,222 total. Post-war surveys rated treatment good or excellent. Thousands corresponded with Americans for decades." In 1985, survivors reunited in Austin, Texas, with 500 attending with families. Former Obersturmführer Hans Vea, Fort Robinson alumnus and later physician in Maine, spoke. "Life in camps surpassed cold German flats. Running water, central heating, food, but also dignity." Former Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Mayer recalled, "Farmers treated us not as enemies, but young men far from home. Meals, knowledge, and sometimes homes were shared. This humanity, from people whose sons fought us, changed us forever." At the reunion, Oberst Hermann Gutz, 78, addressed attendees. "We came as enemies, as Nazis, believers in lies. We left as friends, as Democrats, men who saw the truth. Strength comes not from conquest, but production. Not from hatred, but diversity. Not from tyranny, but freedom. We witnessed democracy's arsenal. Farmers feeding the world, workers building tools of victory, and citizens treating enemies with dignity. America's true weapon was creation and confidence. We returned to Germany carrying a mission to build a society that could create rather than destroy, that could thrive through peace rather than war. The Germany that rose from the ruins was shaped by lessons learned in American prison camps. We had come as conquerors, and we left as students. To America, from your former enemies, now your friends, thank you for showing us the way." The auditorium erupted. Standing ovations filled the hall. Americans and Germans together, Former enemies united in recognition of a transformation that once seemed impossible, back in June 1943, when the first trains rolled into Texas. The scale of the German POW experience in America can be measured in hard numbers, stark and revealing. Over 500 camps in 45 states, every state except Nevada, North Dakota, and Vermont. 175 main camps with 325 branches. Each was built to house 250 to 12,000 prisoners. Average construction, 90 days per camp. Prisoner population, 371,683 Germans, part of 425,871 total Axis POWs. Peak numbers in May 1945. New arrivals, 20,000 per month in 1943, 30,000 monthly after D-Day, 60,000 in the war's final months. Labor contribution, 14 million man-days of agricultural work, 100 million board feet of lumber processed, $230 million in 1940s labor value at 80 cents per prisoner per day. Prisoners filled critical shortages in 46 states. Escapes? Only 2,222 attempts from over 371,000 prisoners, 0.6%. 0 permanent escapes. Most are recaptured within 24 hours. No American civilians were harmed. Education? Over 40,000 enrolled in classes, 135 camp newspapers published, 30,000 studied English, 15,000 vocational trainees, 8,000 took university correspondence courses. Post-war immigration, about 5,000 POWs settled in the U.S. More than 12,000 maintained correspondence with American families. Average duration, 31 years. Many returned as tourists or business partners. Treatment assessment, 95% rated conditions good or excellent. 74% said captivity positively changed their worldview. 61% expressed interest in democracy. By 1945, fewer than 10% held strong Nazi beliefs. The German POWs who saw American industrial might did more than witness history. They were transformed by it. Captivity became education. Defeat became enlightenment. Imprisonment became liberation from the chains of Nazism. America's greatest victory was not on the battlefield, it was in the camps, where undeniable evidence of democratic prosperity accomplished what armies could not, the complete transformation of enemy minds. They arrived believing in German superiority, expecting weak Americans. They left knowing the truth. American industry was not just powerful, it was incomprehensible to minds shaped by scarcity and tyranny. The trains that brought them to captivity in 1943 carried soldiers of the Third Reich. The ships that returned them in 1946 carried architects of democracy. They had seen the future. It worked. The story proves a profound truth. The most powerful weapon in America's arsenal was not its tanks or bombs, but the simple, overwhelming evidence of a free society's ability to create abundance. The German POWs were stunned by American might, but converted by it. Their transformation planted the seeds of Europe's post-war redemption in the final collapse of the Nazi dream. They returned to Germany not as defeated enemies, but as witnesses to what freedom could achieve. The West German economic miracle of the 1950s rested on foundations laid in American prison camps. There, enemy soldiers learned that prosperity came from freedom, not conquest, from human dignity, not racial superiority, from democratic cooperation, not totalitarian control. They arrived expecting a divided, faltering nation. They discovered an industrial colossus of power and unexpected humanity. Prisoners of war became witnesses to democracy at its peak. Their experience seeded the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and Germany's democratic reconstruction. They had seen America. They would never be the same. Their children would grow up in a Germany allied with the United States, a partnership born from the moment 1,850 Africa Corps veterans stepped off trains in Mexia, Texas, discovering that everything they believed was false. The German POW story is ultimately one of redemption through revelation. Victory came not through destruction, but demonstration. Not through propaganda, but prosperity. Not through hatred, but humanity. Soldiers who witnessed American industry became unwitting ambassadors of democracy, returning home carrying seeds of transformation that blossomed into one of history's most successful reconstructions. From Nazi warriors to democratic citizens, their journey remains one of modern history's most extraordinary transformations, accomplished not by force, but by the undeniable evidence of what free people could achieve together. In the end, that was America's secret weapon. Not simply the capacity to produce more tanks or planes than any nation in history, but the ability to convert enemies into friends through the simple, powerful example of a society that worked. The German POWs were stunned by American might, but converted by it. And in that change lay the foundation for a better world.